For 32 years, my wife Ruby left the house every Thursday morning at exactly 8:45, carrying the same worn canvas tote bag, and told me she was going to the public library for her reading group. I never questioned it. I had no reason to. I spent nearly 4 decades as a diesel mechanic for the county school district, a man who understood engines and loyalty, and not much else. Ruby handled the money. Ruby organized our life. I drove the school buses out to be serviced, came home with grease under my fingernails, ate the dinner she made, and trusted her the way you trust the ground beneath your feet, without thinking about it, without ever wondering whether it might move. When she died of pancreatic cancer on a gray Tuesday morning in late October, I believed the worst thing that could happen to a man had just happened to me. I was wrong. The worst thing came about 40 minutes later. They thought grief had hollowed me out. They thought I was a 63-year-old mechanic with a county pension, and nothing to offer and nowhere to go, and they were ready to act on that assumption before Ruby's body was cold. What they didn't know, what none of us knew, including me, was that Ruby had been building something every Thursday morning for 32 years, and she had built it specifically for this moment. Before I tell you what she left behind and what I did with it, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And if you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever been treated like a liability by your own family, drop a comment below. You are not alone, and this story is for you. My name is Arden Mays. I am 63 years old. I spent my working life underneath school buses in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I was proud of that work, and I was proud of the modest house on the east side of town that I helped pay for, and Ruby helped make into a home. We weren't rich. We weren't trying to be. We ate pot roast on Sundays, and drove used cars and saved where we could, and spent where it mattered. I thought I understood our finances because Ruby gave me a summary at the end of every month. What came in, what went out, what was left over. It never occurred to me to look behind the summary. Ruby was 59 when they found the cancer. She fought it for 14 months. She was graceful about it, in a way that made me feel ashamed of every time I had ever complained about a bad back or a long shift. She kept cooking until she couldn't stand, and then she directed me from the kitchen table, correcting my knife work with the patience of a woman who had accepted that some people are just never going to chop an onion properly. She died on a Tuesday. The hospice nurse was there. My son had driven up from Chattanooga that morning. My daughter and her husband arrived about an hour before the end. I stood in the hallway of the hospital afterward, staring at the linoleum, not fully understanding what to do with my hands, and my daughter sat down across from me in the family waiting area and put a manila envelope on the table between us. She had circled a room at a place called Meadow Creek Senior Living. Semi-private, cable included. She had already put the folder together before Ruby died. That was the part I kept coming back to in the days that followed. The folder existed before the funeral. "We've been thinking about this for a while," she said. Her husband stood a few feet away with his arms folded, studying the floor tiles. He was the kind of man who learned early that staying quiet when his wife spoke was less trouble than having opinions. I had never much liked him. Ruby had asked me not to say so, and I had respected that, because she was almost always right about people. "Your pension barely covers your prescriptions," my daughter continued. "And the house, the deed is in Mom's name. She updated it when she got the diagnosis, for estate reasons. The property goes through probate. You'd be there on goodwill. That's not a stable arrangement." Goodwill. She said it the way people say charity when they want to avoid the word. I looked at my son. He was in the corner with his phone turned over in his hands. He caught my eye and gave me the look a man gives when he has already agreed to something and doesn't want to acknowledge that he agreed. I felt old in a way I hadn't that morning. I felt replaceable. I felt, in the most specific and physical way, like I was standing in the middle of a room where all the furniture had already been sold and nobody had told me. I drove home alone. The fall light was low and orange through the windshield, the kind of light Ruby always called pretty. She noticed light the way other people notice weather. When I pushed open the front door, I heard voices. They had an emergency key, one Ruby gave our daughter 2 years earlier, during chemo, in case they needed to check on us. My daughter had decided Ruby's death was the emergency. She was in the master bedroom with the closet thrown open. working through Ruby's clothes with the brisk efficiency of someone on a deadline. Her husband was in the living room with his phone out, photographing the furniture. My furniture. The corner cabinet Ruby's father built by hand in 1961. The wingback chair I had reupholstered twice because Ruby liked the shape of it. "Put the phone away," I said. He put it away. He didn't apologize. On the kitchen counter, stacked next to the toaster, were Ruby's cookbooks. The Betty Crocker from 1987 was on top. Cracked spine, coffee-stained cover, pages so soft from use they barely held together. She had cooked from that book our entire married life. It fell open on its own to the pot roast page, because she'd made it so many times the binding remembered. Someone had stuck a yellow post-it on the cover. Donate. My hands went still. I picked up the cookbook and walked to Ruby's craft room at the back of the house. I locked the door. I sat in her sewing chair with the book in my lap, and my forehead pressed to the cool of the window glass, and tried to breathe evenly. Outside, the neighbor's oak tree was dropping its leaves. Ruby had named that tree Copernicus when we moved in, because she said it looked like it was holding the neighborhood in orbit. I always thought that was a lot to put on a tree. I thought about it now, and couldn't stop my eyes from filling. I don't know how long I sat before I opened the cookbook. Not to a recipe. I turned its spine up the way Ruby always did and let the pages fall where they wanted, and something dropped into my lap. A brass key on a short piece of red thread, small, heavy, worn smooth at the teeth from years of handling. Stamped on one side the number 13, on the other a small embossed shield with 3 letters pressed into the metal, TCU. Tri-County Credit Union, the branch on East Main that I had driven past 10,000 times, without once having a reason to stop. We had never banked there. I had never opened an account there. I had never set foot inside. I held the key and sat very still. Then I looked around the craft room. Ruby's paper calendar, the large desk pad kind she bought every January and never replaced with anything digital, sat on the side table next to her sewing machine. I pulled this year's and flipped backward through the months. Every Thursday in her small, careful handwriting, T845. Last year's calendar was folded in the magazine rack below the table. Same entry, same handwriting. The year before that was in the closet inside a fabric storage bag. Same. I worked backward through every calendar I could find in that room and spread them across the sewing table like a paper timeline. The earliest one I found went back to the spring of 1992. T845, every Thursday, without interruption except for one entry in the winter of 2006 that said T Friday instead, same time, as if she had simply rescheduled. She rescheduled, she never missed. T was not a name. Ruby didn't write people's names in her calendar. She wrote places and times and things that needed doing. And I realized, sitting there with the calendars spread out in front of me, that I had always been vague about the details of her Thursday reading group, because Ruby organized the social calendar. And I had never needed to know the specifics. She had cultivated that vagueness gently, over decades, because she was the kind of woman who thought 30 years ahead. I found what I should have looked for first. Tucked inside the index at the back of the cookbook, a folded deposit slip. Tri-County Credit Union. Safe Deposit Box 318. Account holders, R&A Mays Living Trust. A. Mays, me. My wife had established a trust in both our names, and I had not known it existed. I was in the credit union parking lot at 8:15 the following morning. His name was Mr. Conley. He had worked at that branch for 36 years, longer than Ruby had been coming there. When the receptionist read my name and went to find him, she came back with a man in a gray cardigan who moved like someone who had been watching the parking lot since before his shift started, because he had been. He shook my hand with both of his. His eyes were already red. "She told me you'd come the first Thursday," he said. "She made me promise to be here." We sat in his office with the door closed. He told me about the first time Ruby walked in. Spring of 1992, $60 from the household surplus. One question: what's the smartest thing I can do with this? He'd shown her several options. She'd asked him to explain each one, asked follow-up questions. He said he hadn't heard from clients with 10 times her portfolio, made her decision, and told him she'd be back next Thursday. She was. Every Thursday for 32 years, she sent a card when his wife passed. She brought cookies at Christmas. She called if she was running late. He led me to the private vault room. Box 318 was wider than I expected. When we unlocked it together, his master key, my worn brass one, the lid came up on something I was not prepared for. Certificates. Bonds. A deed to a commercial property on the east side of town that Ruby had purchased in 2004 when the area was still mostly scrubland and cheap, and which was now anchored by a pharmacy and a regional grocery chain. Account statements showing 32 years of compound growth across investments I couldn't have named because I had never learned the vocabulary. A stock portfolio spread across sectors that Ruby had apparently researched during the same library hours I had always assumed she spent on novels. At the bottom of the box, a brown spiral notebook. Mr. Conley placed a single sheet of paper in front of me, appraised value, investment value, cash equivalents, a final number at the bottom. $3,840,000. I sat with that number until it was real. I am not a man who cries easily, and I did not cry then. What I felt was something that sits between awe and grief, the particular ache of understanding how large a person was after they are no longer there to ask about it. Ruby had taken $60 a week and turned it into almost $4 million, quietly, without a word, while making pot roast and watching the evening news and asking me how my back was holding up. I opened the spiral notebook. The first entry was dated March 2007. My daughter's name at the top, followed by a dollar amount and a brief explanation. A debt to a private lender her husband had accumulated through bad investments, threats of legal action, the matter resolved by Ruby before it became something I would have heard about. My daughter had brought it to her mother, not to me. She knew what I would have said. I would have told her husband to face the consequences himself. Ruby had absorbed the consequence instead, and then she came home and made dinner, and I never knew. There were more entries. My son-in-law appeared 4 times across different years. A workplace complaint requiring a private settlement, 2 business loans gone wrong, a legal retainer Ruby paid so quietly that even my daughter hadn't known the full amount. My son had 1 entry, smaller than the others, a debt he'd been too ashamed to mention. Every entry was precise, date, amount, recipient, reason. 12 years of it. Ruby had stood between our children and the results of their worst choices, and she had done it in silence. And she had done it because she loved me enough to let me keep a version of them that was kinder than the truth. At the back of the notebook, on the last page, was a note in her handwriting, 4 words, "For when you're ready." I called Stovall from the parking lot. He was Ruby's estate attorney, on retainer for 5 years, waiting for exactly this call. I told him I needed to make 1 stop before coming to his office. I drove back to the house. I needed to look like a man who had just received the worst possible news. Given the circumstances, it required very little acting. My daughter and son-in-law were there. A rented cargo van sat in the driveway. I walked in looking hollowed out and told them I'd found something at the credit union that morning. Debts, I said. Old debts I hadn't known about, the kind that compound, a lien situation. The house couldn't be sold while it was unresolved. The attorney estimated a year, possibly longer. The room changed temperature. "How much?" my daughter said. I gave her a number large enough to be frightening. She looked at her husband. He examined the floor. I looked at my daughter and asked if she could help me. "Just a loan, temporary." I was scared, I said. I had nowhere else to turn. She was my daughter. Every word was true. It was just about a different fear. She told me adults handle their own problems. Her husband picked up the sandwich he'd made from food in my refrigerator. My daughter told me the Meadow Creek room was still available if I called that week. By 9 o'clock they had loaded the van and left me a single key to the guest room of my own house. My daughter mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that they'd rekeyed the front deadbolt, for security. I waited until I heard their car turn off the block. Then I walked out through the garage, got in my car, and drove to the Marriott on the interstate. I called Stovall. He answered immediately. "They failed," I said. I heard pages turning on his end. How completely? Completely enough. The eviction notice was served the following day at noon. My daughter called 7 times during the 3 hours it took to process. I read Ruby's letter while the calls went to voicemail. 1 page. Shaky handwriting from the last weeks, but every word deliberate. She said she knew I'd be angry about the secret. She said she knew me well enough to know I would have tried to fix everything myself, would have confronted the children, would have spent my pride and my peace trying to hold things together that were already broken. She couldn't watch that. So she fixed things quietly, in the only way available to her. She said the money was mine, always mine. She had only known what to do with it, which was her job, and she was glad to do it. She told me to be fair with the children. Firm, but fair. She said they needed to learn to stand without her. She hadn't been able to teach them that while she was alive, and she was sorry for it. The last line. I loved you every single Thursday, Arden. Every one of them. The aftermath came in waves. The eviction cleared the house within the week. Stovall filed demand notices for the outstanding loan amounts, $214,000, documented entry by entry in the spiral notebook, and the accounts linked to my son-in-law's consulting firm were frozen pending resolution. The commercial property listing my daughter had already started quietly researching dissolved before it had a chance to exist. The estate sale coordinator they'd contacted got a call from Stovall's office explaining that the assets in question were not available for sale. My son-in-law called once about a settlement arrangement. I told him to contact Stovall. My daughter came to the hotel lobby. I had the concierge tell her, respectfully, that I would be in touch when I was ready, and that Stovall's was the correct point of contact in the meantime. My son called from Chattanooga, voice careful and quiet, asking if there was any way forward. I told him I needed time, and that was the truth. What he had done was smaller than what the others had done, but silence in the face of cruelty is its own kind of choice, and he was going to have to sit with that for a while. What they did was not permanent. I knew that. People can change when change becomes necessary, but the changing was their work to do, not mine. Ruby had been doing it for them for 12 years, and it had not made them better, it had only made them comfortable. Comfort, I had learned, is not the same as growth. It is spring now. The oak tree Ruby called Copernicus is in full bud, visible from the kitchen window of my house. My house, properly documented, maintained by the trust, filled with every cookbook I refused to let go to the Goodwill. The Betty Crocker is back on the shelf where it belongs, post-it note removed, spine cracked open to the pot roast page. On Thursday mornings I drive to Tri-County Credit Union at 8:45. Mr. Conley meets me at the door with 2 coffees, and we go over the accounts of the Mays Family Fund, a scholarship program Ruby and I established posthumously together through the county school district. It supports students pursuing careers in the trades, mechanics, plumbing, electrical, the kind of work that holds the world together and rarely gets the credit it deserves. Last month we awarded the first 3 scholarships. 2 young men and a young woman, all of them sharp and capable. All of them coming from situations where a modest amount of money at the right moment changes the entire direction of a life. I shook their hands and told them that the woman who made this possible had believed in their kind of work her whole life, even when the world didn't. I don't know yet what my children will become. My daughter and her husband are navigating what happens when the financial floor you didn't know existed turns out to have been someone else's floor all along. My son is in Chattanooga, quieter now, carrying something he hasn't fully named yet. I watch from a distance. I don't interfere. Ruby couldn't protect them from consequences forever, and neither can I, and honestly, neither should. What I know is this: she was the most intelligent, most deliberate, most quietly powerful person I have ever had the privilege of loving. She went to the credit union every Thursday morning for 32 years and built something extraordinary out of $60 a week and 32 years of patience and a fundamental belief that the people we love deserve to be protected, even from things they don't know are coming. She never asked for recognition. She never asked for anything except that I trust her. I did. I would again, without a second of hesitation, for another 40 years. Every Thursday morning, when I pull into that parking lot, and Mr. Conley is already at the door, I think about all the Thursday mornings Ruby drove this same route alone. I think about all the things she knew and chose to carry by herself so I wouldn't have to. And I think about what it means to love someone not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently, week after week, in the same direction, toward the same destination, building something neither of you will fully understand until the moment it becomes necessary. She built it, I carry it forward. That's the answer she left me, and it is more than enough. Now I want to ask you something. Was I too hard on my children? Or was this the only lesson that would have reached them? Leave me your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.